Parsha Shemini, if you want to follow. And it begins Vayi b'yom hashmini, and it was on the 8th day. So the 8th day of what? It just starts the 8th day. So it says Shemini Ameluim. Rashi explains it was the 8th day of the inauguration of the Mishkan, right? Of the whole process, right? Up until this point, they made the Mishkan. Right? We had a whole weeks about it. And then after they made the Mishkan, we had a whole thing about discussion of the Kohanim and the sacrifices. So everything should be organized. So then it says it was on the 8th day. That day was the first day of the month of Nisan, which is the month that we're in, and we're finishing now. And it says that Kara Moshe la'Aaron u'levanov leziknei Yisrael. So it says here that Moshe calls Aaron, and he calls Aaron's children and all of the elders. V'yomer el Aaron, and he says to him, and then he tells Aaron about a sacrifice he should offer, and as a part of his process. And so here is the part of the inauguration. Moshe is telling him, this is what Aaron you need to do to get everything ready so that we can start using the Mishkan, right, the portable temple, in the way that it's said. So Moshe says to Aaron, come to the altar and perform the service of your offering to atone for yourself and for the people, and then perform the service. So it says Aaron came near the altar. Now the people, they ask the question that it seems like that Aaron is being encouraged, right, as if he wasn't going to come. Right, first Moshe calls him, and then he tells him what he needs to do, and then he tells him, come on, and then it says finally that Aaron came. So it says, what is it that that it seems that Aaron is so reluctant to do what he's supposed to do? We have another place where it says that Hashem tells Aaron what to do, and Aaron jumps to it. Aaron, a Kohen, has a trait that we know that comes from Aaron of being zrizus, of being very quick to do what he has to do. Right? Lots of us procrastinate when we have something we have to do. Maybe we want to do it, maybe we don't want to do it, but we push it off. Aaron was known as the opposite. So why is he being so slow here that he has to be pushed? First God calls him, then Moshe calls him, then Moshe calls him again. Right? So it says that he was actually embarrassed because of things that had happened earlier. He had participated in the sin of the golden calf in a certain manner. In other words, he didn't really believe that you should worship a calf, but he saw the people were getting involved in it, and the first person who stood up against them was Hur, and Hur was killed. The Jewish people killed him because they were in such a frenzy from wanting to worship this calf. So then Aaron said, well, if I just stand up to them, they're going to kill me too. That's not going to do anyone any good. So I'm going to try to manipulate them and slow them down, because by the time they actually get to it, Moshe will arrive. So it seems that he miscalculates, and the people start worshiping the calf before Moshe gets back. So he's embarrassed because in his mind it's like he facilitated the Jewish people to do this enormous sin, which we pay for even till today. And so therefore when God and everybody says to Moshe, tell Aaron he's got to go and offer sacrifices, Aaron says, how can I do that? Look what I did wrong. I did a terrible thing. And so the first thing they tell him is, you're going to come and atone for what you did, because Hashem accepts his repentance and forgives him for what he did, because he didn't mean anything bad. Right? In other words, Aaron's intentions were good. He was trying to. He looks at this mass of people who had this mob mentality, and mob mentalities. You can do anything in a mob. You get a mob of people, they could kill people, and nobody even feels like they were really killed anyone, because it's a whole mob, right? You just had it, in a totally different tense. In Israel recently, they had a couple of funerals of great rabbis, and at the first of the two, people actually got trampled to death. There were so many people in an enclosed area that people got trampled and killed. And then a week later, they had another funeral, and people got injured in the same way, but they weren't killed. But you see, what a mob, right? Here, the mob, in the case of the funeral, they have only good intent. But so many people in an enclosed place that you don't even realize what's going on. So here, what Aaron does. So this is where we see that Aaron is given forgiveness for what he did, and that he's allowed to come back into the temple and to inaugurate it. But that's why Aaron was overly slow in coming, because he had that feeling. And the next whole page or so talks about various types of sacrifices. But I want to get to the next section, which tells us a story, which I'm actually going to do a class on this week on Shabbos in length. But if we look on 592 and 593, this is one of the famous stories of the Torah, that it tells us here that the sons of Aaron, right, he had more than two sons, but these two, Nadav and Avihu. So that was their name. One was called Nadav, one was Avihu. They were considered to be extremely righteous people. The understanding was that most likely they would take over for Moshe and Aaron in the next generation, because they were good leaders, they were bright, they were righteous, and they were active. And it says here that they were killed, right? And we'll hear the story. Just as an aside, this, according to some commentaries, the names here of Nadav and Avihu is one of the sources we have, not only naming your children after your parents, but naming a boy or even a girl cross-gender. In other words, to name a son after your mother, which normally some people might say, well, if somebody's mother passes away, you have to name it. You have to wait to have a girl. Your mother's a woman, so you're going to name for her. If the father passes away, then you wait to have a boy. And here we see that that's not the case, because Nadav and Avihu were both men, and Nadav, right, comes from giving, the word give, Nadava, to give freely, and that was like, he considered that to be like his mother. His mother was like that, and his mother died. So Aaron named his son for his mother, and Avihu, right, the other son is Avihu, he is my father. He is like my father. He was named for him. So you see, here's a case where a boy is named for a woman. So that was an old Jewish tradition that could be. So here's what happens to them. It says each took his fire pan. Right, they were Kohanim. They took these little shovels that they had, these special shovels that were used in the service in the temple, and they put fire in them, which was their purpose, and placed incense upon it, and that also was their purpose. You put incense on it, and it burnt the incense within the temple, and then they brought it to Hashem. The problem was they did this on their own. In other words, Hashem did not tell them, take this incense and this incense and this incense and put them together and burn them in the temple. Right? They just went on their own, and they created their own ritual. They went and they created this with and they put the incense in, and they lit it on fire. And it says here it was an alien fire that he had not commanded them. Hashem didn't tell them to do this. So what's their intention? So that the Talmud gives a number of answers to this. My class will be on it. That's why there's so much written about this. Because here, what did they do? They went and they didn't ignore the Word of God. They didn't do anything that seems negative. In fact, they went and they thought, we're going to do something extra. We're going to do an extra thing for God. We're going to burn this incense in the temple out of our love for God, our respect for God, right? And it says that God did not like that. He didn't want them to do that. They weren't commanded to do it, and he kills them. And you'll see in the next few lines that they're killed for it, that their punishment is death. So one has to wonder what really is going on here. You see, these two righteous men who are going to be the next leaders of the Jewish people are killed because they didn't do something they shouldn't do. They did something that was uncalled for. There was no reason for it. So we have to understand what that is. So it says, a fire came forth from before Hashem and consumed them, and they died before Hashem. Right, and that ends it. Now, it's brought up again next week, but that ends, right, the actual description. The next part is Moshe having to go and console his brother over the death of his two very special young sons. And so the Talmud asks the question, what actually did they do? Like, it doesn't make sense that they just simply burnt incense and they were killed. So what did they do? So the Talmud gives a bunch of different answers as to what they did. One of them says that they were under the influence. They either were drinking or some type of drug. And the reason that they would use it is what you hear from many artists even. They hear these two were extraordinarily high-level people. They were very passionate in their relationship with the Jewish people and with God. And it says that they decided that they were doing everything they were supposed to do. Now they wanted to do something more. They understood that that the human mind can only accomplish so much. However, if you add to the human mind by giving it a drug that will cause you to see things differently, you can also add that to your relationship with God. It's just like you hear from musicians, you hear from artists, and you see it, that they'll take different drugs in their life, and then they'll paint or they'll make music, and in their mind, they're making, it's extraordinary. Right? They never could have done this without the drug, they'll say. Now, 20 years later, they may come back and tell you that was ridiculous, right? But at that time, they really believe it. In some cases, it may be, but in most cases, it's not. But they think, you get a person like, Van Gogh or Picasso, someone like this, and they're painting, and I've got to the extent of my creativity. So they say, well, I'm going to take a drug that'll make me hallucinate, and then I can be even more creative, right? And I'll do more. So this is this concept that they were thinking. We've gone and done as much as we could to get as close to God as possible, as humanly possible. Now we're going to use this drug to help us get a little further. If it's a drug, if it's wine, something that would affect their mind. And because of this, they thought that would be the case. And God says back, no, that's not how it's done. You can't go and use something outside in order to cause this effect. You, as a human being, have the ability to get as close to me as is possible and have a relationship with other Jews and with God as is possible, but to use an outside influence might appear to you to bring you closer, but it doesn't work. And this is something we find in our lives all the time, that our desire to use other things to try to make it possible for us to excel. Right? You can see it in many ways. One of the ways, like I was talking to a friend of mine a while ago, who's an extremely successful businessman, an entrepreneur, who went from, when I first met him, he was almost penniless. Now he's a multi-millionaire, like hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And we were talking once about technology. So how, they started with cell phones back in I'd say the late 1980s, 1990s, and then they went from these really ridiculous cell phones and car phones to more portable ones, and then they went from that to the smartphones where you can text and you can email. Right? It wasn't enough that you could just email people. You had your email with you wherever you went. Right? It's like it's gone further and further along. And he says that most people believe that when it comes to business, what you do, you go out and you buy the newest technology. It makes it easier for you to do your job. But what happens then is that everyone, including your competitors, get the technology, and then it becomes an expectation that you're going to do it, and it doesn't make your job easier, it makes it harder. Like it used to be, for instance, if you wanted to make an offer to somebody for a business, you would have to you'd have to write them a letter and send them a contract. Then they came out with faxes. You could do it with a fax, right? It'd take a couple of minutes. Then they came up with email that you could do it, right? There's all different ways that a person is able to send information back and forth. So it used to be if somebody would want to say something to me, it would take them 3 days for me to get it because it'd be a letter. Now if I don't answer them in 20 minutes, they think something's wrong. Or like when I was a kid, we'd go out, and my mother would say, okay, wherever you're going, call me when you're there. So I'd call her when I'm there. But I could be gone for 6-7 hours, and she wouldn't think anything of it, because that's what you did. Like if I had to go downtown or something, it'd be gone 6-7 hours. Today, with a cell phone, if my mother would have called me, and I didn't answer for an hour, she would call the police, right? There's an expectation of immediacy, right? What happened in business was that people would start what was before an advantage now became a normal thing, and everybody had to have it, and then the next new thing would come, and you'd build it up and build it up and build up, and you think you're going to get ahead. In reality, you don't get ahead. You just make more work for yourself, because now instead of responding to a contract once in a week, you can respond to a contract 20 times in 10 minutes, right? And they expect you to. That's a change. It's the same thing with them. They went as far as they could. They did as much as they could, and then they said, we're going to now use technology, in their case use drugs or liquor, to get even further. And it doesn't really work, because it just makes things that more difficult for us as well. It makes our lives, we think it makes our lives easier, but they really don't. Not that all machines didn't. There are certain machines and technology that definitely made our lives easier, but the expectations have changed. You could imagine 100 years ago when women had to do the wash, right? They spent an entire day at the river, right, cleaning their clothes, and not that many clothes, right? Then they got a washing machine, and you can accomplish the same thing in an hour, right? So so things change, and there are certain things that can make it easier, but then there's that expectation that you can do more. I would say in the days when a woman had to do wash by hand, and she had to cook everything, from the beginning, from scratch, that it wasn't very easy for her to also have a full-time job. Right? Today is an expectation when people get married, young people get married, that both of them will work. Right? It's expected, right? Because life seems to have gotten easier. So what we do is we up our responsibility level. It doesn't necessarily help in the right way. That's what happened with them. So they went and they did what they shouldn't do, and they tried to use drugs to bring themselves closer, and that didn't work. That's one opinion. Another one is that they were disrespectful to Moshe and Aaron. And a quote says, "When are these two old men going to die so we can take over?" Now, I doubt that they actually said that. That the Talmud usually uses very strong wording when they quote. But what they basically says that they didn't treat them with the proper respect, because they knew they were the next in line, and they wanted to get going. They had positive reason. They wanted to start doing their job. They wanted to bring the Jewish people to the next step, right? And but what they didn't do is give proper respect and acknowledgement to the previous generation. And in the world that we live in, most cultures have an idea of elders, right? Of the people from the earlier time who are still alive. But and some cultures have some form of respect for them. But in the Jewish culture, it's enormously important. Right? And our entire ability to perform Judaism is based on the fact that there were people who did it the generation before us. That we can continue with what they did. They handed it down to us. If we don't have elders and we don't have previous generations, we're lost. Right? We really are. While other nations, it's a nice thing that they do, but it's not essential. In this case, when they were sort of disparaging to the previous generation, they were not giving the proper respect that's necessary to do it. The Talmud tells a story. It says that one of the authors in the Talmud, one of the rabbis, has said that one of his students came to him and answered and he was standing with him, and somebody asked a question, and the student answered the question, and it was disrespectful to the teacher that the student should answer the question like that in front of the teacher. So it says because of it he died. The student died. So he said, well, if I walk into a room, right, so people are supposed to stand up. What if they don't stand up? Nothing. What if they don't stand up? And I can say, you know what, I would prefer you don't do that. When I come in, I don't want you to do that. I have that power. I have the ability. You want to show me respect? In my eyes, that's not showing me respect. That's going too far. So I can say such a thing. So why didn't the rabbi say, when the student answered the question in front of him, because it was disrespectful, I forgive him. No big deal. And then the student wouldn't have died. He died. The student died. So it says that when it comes to respect of the elders, when it comes to something like answering a question, which is the whole purpose of having elders, for them to give you the tradition, if you don't respect that, the teacher himself can't forgive you, because it's not just the teacher that you're affecting the Jewish people forever. Because if we start disrespecting the previous generation, then whatever they would have to teach us, we wouldn't learn, and we would be starting over from nothing. And that for us is totally destructive. So there's a very significant importance to the fact that we have this idea of tradition, right? Of tying ourselves to the previous generation. So those say that could be one of that they did that, and that's why they were killed. Because it uses the expression that they made a strange fire. That was that they didn't follow the idea of the tradition of one to the next, and because of it they were killed. So whatever it was, we know that it was something significant. So then it says that Moshe calls Aaron, and he tries to console him, and the other children come and they take over for those two, and they also need to be consoled. Right? And then right away here, this is why the Medrash thinks that it's talking about drugs or alcohol, because right away on 594 and 595, right at the top, you have Hashem then speaking to Avram. So right away after his sons die, he says, "Do not drink intoxicating wine, you or your sons, with you, when you come to the tent, right, to the temple, that you do not die. This is an eternal decree for your generations. Right? So here he's actually telling him, don't think that artificial stimulants and artificial drugs that causes you to hallucinate and expand your mind are what I want you to do. No, it's not good. Don't do that. So he's here, he says it. So therefore, that's one of the reasons the Medrash thinks that that's what happened to them, that they happened in such a way. We then have in verse 12 a funny expression. It begins in the Hebrew. It says, "Ve'edaber Moshe el Aaron." Moshe says to Aaron, "V'el Elazar, v'el Itamar," and to Elazar and Itamar, who are the other two sons, "Banav hanosrim." It says the leftover sons, the two who were left over, right? Meaning they weren't killed. There were 4 sons, 2 were killed, and 2 were left, right? But that's the expression. In the real translation here, it says his remaining sons. But if you really translate the words literally, it means the leftovers, the ones who were left behind, right? And then he goes and tells them what to do. And the commentaries ask, why do they use such a funny word, right? It's almost like they're superfluous sons. That there were 4 sons, 2 got killed, so Moshe went to the 2 who didn't really matter, the 2 superfluous sons who were left behind, and says, okay, you got to take over for your brothers, because you're the only ones left. But the word also can give us the idea that these ones who were left behind are like the survivors. They survived. The other 2 brothers were killed, these 2 survived. Right? That's what the word can mean. Then, but what did they survive? They weren't in the temple when their brothers were killed. They didn't offer a sacrifice. They weren't tied into it. It would be like saying, I'm a survivor of the Holocaust, and I wasn't there. Right? I mean, how am I a survivor of the Holocaust? So the point is that that it's true to say that I'm a survivor of the Holocaust, and it's true what they say here. So there's, for instance, if you remember the mayor of New York, Ed Koch. He was a mayor like 25, 30 years ago already. So Ed Koch, one time, he was asked to speak at a Holocaust program, and he said that I am a survivor. Now, Ed Koch was born in New York and grew up in New York, and he was as much a survivor as me. He wasn't a survivor, so what does it mean by saying he's a survivor? So he said that when he went to a Holocaust museum, he saw there the globe that sat on Hitler's desk. And on that globe, he had all of the countries of Europe, and in there he had a number on each one. And those numbers were the numbers of Jews in these countries. And there was one country, Albania, it had the number 1. There was only 1 Jew in the whole country. And Hitler was prepared to attack that country to just get that 1 Jew, because he wanted to get them all, right? So he says, but he didn't. He didn't accomplish it, and he failed. And because he failed, my grandparents were able to live. And they were able to have my parents, who were able to have me. But if he had been successful, I wouldn't be here. So I am a survivor. Not in the term that way we know it, but the fact is all Jews are survivors. So here also, these 2 brothers, they weren't in the temple, right? They didn't survive that. They weren't there. When their brothers got killed and the fire came out to kill them, they weren't there. They didn't see it and live. But the fact is that their lives are now directly related to what happened to their brothers. And what happens to them from now on is because they are alive and their brothers aren't. So in that sense, all Jews are survivors of all catastrophes that happen to any Jew. And that's what it's telling us. And then it goes on to tell you a bit more about the sacrifices. So I want to go to the next topic on 596 and 597. And it's going to switch now from that story. It's going to tell us now about another new mitzvah that we have. It's not new for us, but new here, which is the laws of kosher. The bottom of 596 and 597. And it says, Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aaron. He says to them, speak to the children of Israel. There are the creatures that you may eat from among all the animals that are on the earth. Everything among the animals that has a split hoof, which is completely separated into double hooves, and all that brings up its cud, that one you may eat, right? So that's a sign of a large animal, like a cow. It has to have a split hoof, and it has to regurgitate its food. That's how it eats. But this is what you shall not eat from among them that bring up their cud, or that has split hooves. So here he's saying that, but these following ones will have one of those signs, not both, and you can't eat them, like the camel, because it does chew its cud, but it doesn't have a split hoof, and therefore you can't eat it. And the hyrax, it brings up its cud, but its hoof is not split. Right? And the hare, for it brings up its cud, and the hoof is not split, and it's unclean. And the pig, for its hoof is split, but it is not, and it's separated, but it doesn't chew its cud. These are all examples of animals you can't eat. Now, if you look at it in the Hebrew, there's a little details that are not found in the English. We'll see. It says, let's see, where does it actually say it? So when it tells us about these animals, it says, clean to you. So beginning with the camel. The camel, where it gives a description of the camel, it tells you the camel chooses cud but does not have a split hoof. But it's speaking in the future tense. Right? The camel, that's the camel will be an animal that chooses cud. Right? Then when it goes to the next one, where it talks about this hyrax, this animal called a hyrax, some type of a deer-like animal, it's speaking in the present tense. It says it doesn't chew its cud, right? I mean, it does chew its cud, but it doesn't have split hooves in the present tense. When it talks about the rabbit, right, it's in past tense. All right, this is an animal that has chewed its cud and has one unsplit hoof. So what it does is it tells you these three, but one is in future tense, one is present, one's past, all in one sentence. So you say, in one paragraph, how can that be? Right? If Hashem is talking to us, he's either telling us about all the animals using one tense, right? It doesn't make a difference, future, past, or present. He's telling us you can't eat this animal. So why change the tense in every one of them? Right? Imagine if in English, if you had a paragraph and I'm describing a group of people and I talk about one part of the group in the future tense and one present and one past tense. It makes no sense. Either I'm telling you something as it's happening, or something before it happens, or something after it happened. I can't be telling you all three at the same time, right? And that's what this is doing. So one of the commenters I saw had a brilliant statement, and he said that the reason that it does this is that it's telling you about an animal that's unclean. You can't eat it. It's not kosher, right? Unclean doesn't mean it's dirty. It's just the best word we have in English to describe something that's spiritually impure. So we say you can't eat that animal. So let's extrapolate this to the idea of dealing with people. When you're talking about dealing with people, if a person, right? If you're dealing with a person, and that person is not a kosher person, right? You have to see, or if somebody asks you a question and you need to tell them the truth, that guy's not such a great guy. Or even for yourself, we judge people all the time, even though it's not a good thing, but we always do. We judge a person, right? We see a person, right, and they are acting in a very weird way, and so we have to say, why? So it says, in order to be able to truly understand why a person acts in the way they do, before we start ostracizing people and sending them away and treating them badly because what appears to be something that they're doing, we should first know about where they're going and who they are and where they're coming from. We need to know the future tense, the present tense, and the past tense. If we know that, then we have a good idea of what that person's like. So the person who I was speaking to about this, he tells me that there's a story. He says that there was a couple who went through the Holocaust. And when they got out of the Holocaust, they found each other. They were a young couple who had gotten married. After the Holocaust, they found each other again. But there was a difference. They were both very observant people. But during the war, because of their experiences, he stopped being observant. And she, on the other hand, became more observant. From the similar experiences, but their life came out different. And they still loved each other and wanted to stay married, so they stayed married and they moved off to the United States. And for anything that she could do, she could not get him to do anything religious. Because in his mind, he couldn't believe in it after what he saw. And so she tries to get him to go to shul, tries to get him to put on tefillin, tries to get him to keep kosher, can't get him to do anything. Well, what happened is that every day he would get up in the morning and walk down for a coffee and buy a newspaper and read his coffee, right? Read his newspaper and drink his coffee. So she says to him, listen, just do me one favor. Go to shul and drink your coffee and read the newspaper in shul. Just do that. You don't have to pray. Don't go to minyan. Just go in there and sit down. So he said, it's stupid, but if that's what my wife wants, right? She's not asking me to do something I go against. I'll do it for her. So you get up in the morning, go down, buy a coffee, buy a newspaper, go into the shul, sit in the back row while they're having services, right? And he would read the newspaper, right? So now you imagine you're in shul, right? And you come every morning to pray at 6:45 in the morning, and you see a guy sitting in the back of the shul every single day for 5 years. He keeps sitting there reading the newspaper. He doesn't take a sitter. He doesn't pray. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't participate. When you have a happy occasion, he doesn't come. A sad one, he doesn't come. He's like a bump on a log. He's sitting there in the back row reading the newspaper. So what would you think? You think this guy's an idiot. What kind of he's trying to insult us? He comes here just to show us he won't pray? Right? That's right. But if you can only say that if you don't know where he came from. Where he came from was that he was a very religious person, but he saw things that destroyed his mind, that he couldn't handle. Right? If you understand that, then you'll judge that man very differently. Right? So that's why the Torah tells us that it tells you one part of the law of kosher in the future tense, and one in the present tense, and one in the past tense, and you can't eat any of them. They're all tameh. They're all spiritually corrupt. So now, when you meet someone that appears to you to be something off, and that you would normally say this person is corrupt, first find out their history, find out who they are, find out where they're going, and then make your judgment. Because chances are something could have happened in the life of that person. Right? It's very similar to the talk I gave a few years ago about everybody has baggage. Right? I always say that when somebody walks into our shul, they're carrying with them every negative experience they ever had in a shul. When it was the time they were a little kid. Not only everyone they had, everyone they imagined that they had, and everyone that anybody ever told them. Right? They carry it with them. They walk in, somebody told them, I went into a shul, an Orthodox shul, and they wouldn't talk to me. I went to an Orthodox shul, and they must have thought I wasn't dressed right because they wouldn't even look at me. I went into an Orthodox shul, and it was, people were so unfriendly, you could die right there in the sanctuary and nobody'd know it. But you hear that from people, and it's all because something happened to them in their life that was similar, or in their mind was similar, or that someone told them was similar, and they're carrying that with them. So when they're walking in the door of the shul, it's like they're carrying bags with them, right? So we have to realize that they're not going to act normal when they come in. They're going to act apprehensive, afraid, aggressive, all depending on how that person acts when they're in anxiety. And you don't certainly, you're welcoming people at your shul. You don't really appreciate if somebody snaps at you or is mean for no reason, but there is a reason. It's just a reason that has nothing to do with you and nothing to do with that shul. It has to do with what they're carrying with them. And it's the same idea. If you don't know where that person's coming from or the baggage they're carrying with them, then how do you judge them when they walk into your shul? You can't. You have to treat them and take them for what they are, and then eventually hope that you can work with them. Because you don't know what they went through. How many of us, either ourselves, we've had experiences, or we know people who had experiences, where everything that goes on, right, with it is, they always have had something that really bothered them, right? That really hurt them. Somebody insulted you. Somebody said you don't look right. A bunch of people got together and talked. They left you out. That you say good Shabbos to 5 people, nobody responds. This type of thing, right? In reality, in my opinion, probably 40% of that is in our own heads. It didn't really happen, but we think it happened. But 60% of it does happen, right? And so now the next time you're going to walk in the shul, which could be 10 years later, you're afraid it's going to happen again. That everyone's going to sit down, you're going to stand up, and everyone will laugh at you, right? Well, no one's going to do that, but we're afraid it will. That's because those who are here, have to realize the person coming in has that. They have that feeling. And therefore we have to anticipate it and treat them in the right way, just like we have here with the laws of kosher. It's the same idea. Now, the laws of kosher are not, simple. There's a lot to them that are important for us to get an idea about. See, the law, what makes the laws of kosher a little bit different than most other mitzvahs is that you have the idea that you're supposed to, do a mitzvah, any mitzvah, God says we should do it. The laws of kosher have an additional thing, and that is that they have an effect on you because you're ingesting it, you're eating it. Just like we know clearly that the food that we eat has an effect on us. It can affect our mood. It can affect our sugar levels. It can affect our energy. It can affect our being alive or not. Right? You eat the wrong thing, you're allergic to it. It could kill you. You eat sugar at the wrong time, and you can act out or not act out or fall asleep or be awake, and all because of what we ate. That's physically. We believe that spiritually it also has an effect. There's some foods that God put into the world that give you spiritual nourishment, just like certain foods give you physical nourishment. Right? If you're low in a certain vitamin, like say vitamin C, and you eat an orange, it helps you. Right? You might not even know that you need vitamin C, but you have a desire for an orange, so you eat it. Right? That's a physical effect from eating food. Right? That happens to us. If you eat whipped cream, right, there are no positive things going to happen to you. If you eat cream all day, it's kosher, right? But physically, it's not going to help you. It doesn't give you any vitamins, minerals, anything that you need. It's just sweet, right? So you're not going to really get any good things out of it. On the other hand, in the spiritual world, you have the same thing. There are certain things that God gave spiritual nourishment to us with by our eating it, and certain things don't. The things that do, right? Those are the kosher things. The kosher things are something really what we should eat. You should eat something that's not only good for you physically, but also good for you spiritually. Not only should you eat in a healthy way, but it's also a spiritually healthy way. Because just as physical food nourishes your body, right, kosher food nourishes your soul. And just like eating the wrong food affects your body negatively, eating the wrong food affects your soul negatively. In the same way. Most mitzvahs don't have that direct an effect on us as kosher does. It's a very direct effect. In fact, the Talmud says that one of the signs that a person is a Jew is that they're merciful. And if a person is merciful, that somehow shows you that you have reason to think that person might be Jewish. Not that you can't have non-Jews who are merciful. You certainly can. But it's a trait of Jews. And in fact, I gave a class on it recently that we are so merciful that it's almost a fault, right? Look how we deal in war with the Palestinians, right? We're going to bomb them, but before we bomb them, we're going to tell them we're going to bomb them. So that way they should all run away. So then why are we bombing them? Right? They should all run out of their houses and get away, and we're going to bomb them. Right? What other country in the world goes and does that? And they don't surprise them and drop bombs on them. He said, no, we're going to tell them, get out of the area, we're dropping bombs. Well, then why drop the bomb? Because nobody's there. Right? The fact is that we're so merciful, we go to the point where it's like cutting our nose off to spite our face. But that's who we are. So the Talmud says the reason that we're like that is because we eat kosher. Right? It's became a part of us. And that because you are what you eat. And kosher food is a kind of food that comes from, not only has a spiritual effect, but look at the animal. The animals are usually docile. They're not, like, you don't have any kosher meat eater animals. Lions aren't kosher. Right? Animals that eat people, that eat other types of things like that are not kosher. Not because of that, they're just not kosher. While animals like a deer, a cow, which are basically just pleasant animals, they are kosher. And there's an effect on you. In the physical world, we say you are what you eat. In the spiritual world, it's also the case. And therefore, the more that you see people who are straying from the laws, from keeping kosher, it becomes less and less a part of them, and it goes on for generations, the less you see that trait. In fact, there was a study when I was working for the UJA that 90% of all money given to the UJA comes from 10% of the Jews. Now, the same study earlier, right, would have said that 70% of the money comes from 10% of the Jews. And what's happened is that more and more Jews have strayed from being Jewish. They've stopped tying themselves to being Jewish. You notice it with giving all the time, how you can have families that are heavy givers to religious institutions. The next generation, that same family, who are very wealthy, will be heavy givers to like the UJA in Israel. The next generation of the same family, the kids will be giving to the opera and to the city park. They're all important things, but you'll notice that the further away they are from being spiritually Jewish, the less they participate in Jewish things. And that's the point of kosher. It's one of the things that helps us stay tied in like that. So here it goes through all the different things. If you look on the next page, in the top line, it talks about the birds. So it talks about different ones that you can't eat. The nesher, the peres, the oznia, the da'ah, and the ayah. So interestingly enough, the da'ah is found there's two places in the Torah, one in the book of Devarim, where it reviews what's kosher. Right, and there it talks about the birds that are kosher. And it says the exact same thing as here, except what is here is called the da'ah, is there is called the ra'ah. The letter dalid becomes a resh. It changes. And, some people for a long time thought it was an error. Like the scribe made a mistake because a dalid and a resh look very similar. The dalid looks like a resh with a little bump on it, that's all. So, but the commentaries say no, that this was purpose. And the animal that is known as the da here is known as the ra'ah there. It's the same animal. And it says, and why is it? So the Talmud says that this bird has such an amazing ability to see that and its knowledge teaches it that it could sit in Bavel, which was Iraq, and see all the way to Israel. Right? It doesn't mean it literally, of course. It means this animal had, right, like a hawk. A hawk can be way, way up in the air, and it can see a little mouse running underneath the wheat stalks, and it can fly down and get the mouse. Right? When you and I would be lucky to see a Volkswagen, right? But a hawk can see like a little tiny mouse. He has great sight. That's what it says here. So the interesting thing is, as the commentaries say, that the da and the ra being the same. Ra means to see. That's what it ro'eh, to see, and da means to know. So here you have this animal that knows its ability to see is so good that it can sit in Iraq, which was Bavel, and it can see all the way to Israel. Right? As I said, it's not literal. But they took this and they said, if you want to, and that's not kosher, it says. So if you want to know something, I'll give you an example of something that's not kosher. And here we're speaking a different type of not kosher. We're saying a person who sits outside of Israel and looks into Israel and wants to tell Israel what to do, that's not kosher. That's what it says. The bird sits in Iraq and it looks into Israel, he's not kosher. That's what it says in the Torah. So here he's telling us it's a political statement that that we as Jews are tied to the land of Israel and we care what happens in the land of Israel. You could be pro the government, not pro the government, pro the state, not pro the state. The bottom line is every Jew cares about Israel. They just might care about it in different ways, but they do. And if you want to be somebody and say, Israel has to do this and this and this, it's not really kosher to be living in Canada and be telling Israel what to do. Right? It's a whole other story to be living in Israel and tell Israel what to do. Because you've got what they say, no skin in the game. You have nothing to lose. You're living in another country. So the point is that that's not kosher. A kosher way of doing it is to be a part of it, not to stand as an outsider. This is not just with politics, this is with everything. In order to affect the Jewish people, it's not enough to simply tell them what to do. It's to be a part of it. Right? When we see something is wrong in the world, it's a message from God that we should fix it. Right? If there's something that really bugs you, you can't understand why people are starving in Africa or why there are poor Jews in Toronto. You can't understand how that's possible. So if that bothers you, then that's God's message to you that you can fix it. You have the ability to do something about it. God's letting you know that. And if you see the problem, you have a responsibility to fix it. This animal sees the problem and tells him what to do, but he doesn't try to fix it. He's just prepared to do it. It's like a Monday morning quarterback. You've heard of that before? A Monday morning quarterback is a guy watches football on Sunday, right? And his favorite team loses. And the next day he goes around the water cooler in his office with the other guys and they talk about it and he says, that guy, look, he's a bum, that quarterback. He should have run when he passed. He should have passed when he ran. He should have this or this. Everybody can be a Monday morning quarterback. Everyone can tell the quarterback what to do after the game's over, right? That's not anything special. So this bird can tell Israel what to do. No big deal. He's not even there. and no one's going to listen to him. That's the point. And in our own lives, it's the same idea, right? We have to be a part of it. If you want to try to make your community better, you have to fix it. If you want to make the shul better, you have to fix it. I tell, sometimes people will have an interaction with somebody in shul, and it won't go well. And I always feel bad about it. Somebody was mean to another person, somebody insulted somebody, but what's the response of the person? Very often is, I'm not going to that shul anymore. I won't go anymore. What does the shul have to do with it? Nothing. The shul had nothing to do with it. The shul says we're open, people can come. Sometimes the people who come need to work on their being more sophisticated in how they speak. They shouldn't be rude. Right? But should I say that person can't come because he's rude? I can't say that. But I can say he doesn't represent me, doesn't represent my shul. Nevertheless, they don't come back. They leave. Right? I say, and when the person comes and they say, he insulted me, and so I decided I'm not going to do my position anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to do that. I'm leaving. So I say, I'm sorry the guy insulted you, that this happened. It's wrong. You shouldn't do that. On the other hand, you have a responsibility. I have a responsibility within our shul. You can't just walk out because somebody said that. Right? That you wanted that position, you got it. Or I say, if somebody insulted you, then help us make a program that will educate people not to talk that way. Instead of just leaving going to the next shul, where the same thing will happen. Right? And even worse, it's funny that sometimes, when you're in a small shul, and if you want to have involvement, let's say if you want to be involved with me, with the rabbi, all you got to do is tell me. You call me on the phone, you can see me. And we'll get together, and the more you want to be involved and talk to me, the more you can. Right? So if let's say you're a person and you call me, and it happens to be that day I can't see anyone. So you get angry, you decide you're going to leave the shul, and you go to another shul. Right? What happens to the other shul? The rabbi's even less time for you. But nevertheless, you do it. Why? Because you want to make a point. But you end up losing. Right? The idea is, if something like that happens, come and fix it. Right? And that's why this bird's not kosher. Yeah?
I want to ask you about this idea of bread of shame. Like you said, you have to help people, and you have to help them when they're in need. Where is that concept, bread of shame, coming from?
Bread of shame is where it's talking about, really about money. Where if I'm a successful person and then something, God forbid, goes bad, or Mr. X is a successful person and something bad goes bad, now he's got no money, right? So for him to have to ask for money is bread of shame. It means that you'll support him, you're going to give him bread, but he's humiliated that he has to ask for money, right? So you try to do things like that in a way that doesn't humiliate him, like he doesn't know who gave it to him, then he's not humiliated, right? Or another one is if you have a child, the child's 10 years old, and he asks you for $5, right? That's perfectly normal. A child has no way of making money. You can say yes, you can say no, but it's nothing abnormal for a child to do that, right? They're living off you. If you have a 30-year-old son and he comes and asks you for money, right? He's humiliated because he should be self-sufficient. He wants to be self-sufficient, and he's not. And therefore he has to go to his parents to give him money. That's shameful. The same act when he's younger, that's not shameful. When he's older, it is. Even if it really isn't shameful. Let's say he can't make a living. He has a deficit. There's something wrong. Or he's in school and he can't work because he's in school and he needs money. So but nevertheless, there is an immediate feeling among people of being humiliated when you have to ask for something that the average person doesn't have to. The fact that I have to go on welfare is humiliating. The fact that I have to ask for a loan, that I have to ask for this, the fact that I have to come for marriage counseling is humiliating. I should be able to have a good marriage without going into someone. I'm not crazy. I don't need a psychiatrist. And the reality is everybody can benefit from marriage counseling, no matter how good your marriage is. But if you're having a problem, right, don't go saying, I don't want to. I'm humiliated to have to go meet with the rabbi. It's funny is that sometimes, I'll meet with people and they'll have marital problems, and I try to help. And I'm very discreet about it, and I never talk about them. But there are certain funny things that will happen, or odd things. Like, for instance, somebody will want to come, and the spouse will say they're not going to come because they're embarrassed to come to me, because I'm friendly with them. And I think the other spouse will say, wait a minute, you because you're close to him and you know him and you're a part of his shul and he's your rabbi and we pay for our membership, that's who you should go to, right? For you not to go there, you have to go to a rabbi you don't know, who you have no idea if he knows what he's doing or doesn't know what he's doing. You're cutting off your nose for yourself, right? So people are like that because being humiliated, even unintentionally, is an extremely strong motivator and fear. It's a big deal. So that's where it comes from. Okay? So that's something about kosher. Let's just take a look at a couple of things. All right, if we go back to the bottom of 603, here it talks about pots and pans. Any earthenware utensil into whose interior a certain animal fell, everything in it shall be contaminated, and you shall break it. All right, so what's it talking about here? Here we have the laws of Tuma and Tahara, which we don't really can't follow today. It's not like kosher and not kosher, but it means that you have the ability to enter into the temple or eat sacrifices if you are tahor, meaning very poorly translated would be spiritually clean, and or if you can't go into the temple because you've come into contact with something, you would be spiritually unclean. Again, these are terrible words for it because it's got nothing to do with clean and unclean. You just don't have the ability to do something. And it's not good or bad because let's say if somebody dies and you help with the funeral, right? That's a good thing, right? But you become spiritually unclean because you came in contact with the dead. So it's not a positive or a negative. It's just a fact. You have blue eyes, you have brown eyes. That's all it is. So here it says there are certain pots. Right? Every object has the ability to become spiritually clean or unclean when you want to use it or if you come into contact with it. So, for instance, one of the things that can do this is called a sheretz. A sheretz is a disgusting animal, or types of animals. Like a sheretz would be a lizard. A sheretz could be other similar types of animals. And if you put this animal touches your pot, right, and it touches the pot becomes unkosher. For this type of unkosher, not food unkosher, it becomes unclean. Right? If it says like this, that if it's an earthenware one, right? So an animal goes and touches the pot made out of clay, it becomes spiritually unclean. If you have a metal pot and he touches it, it becomes spiritually unclean. However, if you have a lizard and it's, let's say, hanging from a string, and its string brings it right inside your pot, but it doesn't touch the pot, so if it's made out of clay, right, so then it becomes no good, and if it's made out of metal, it's still fine. So what's the difference? That a metal pot has a worth, right? It's worth something, right? A clay pot, in those days especially, did not. You just took mud and you made a pot out of it. It had no worth. It was, at most, it was worth like pennies. So right? So the clay pot had no worth, while the metal pot had worth. So the metal pot itself, right? What the pot is and what's in it is something that's important. The clay pot's not. So the thing that's important, right? It would become unusable by the animal going into it but not touching it, and the other one it wouldn't. And the idea tells you that the significance really of the object, that if you have the clay object, which in and of itself has no worth, then the unusable animal, right, would have to touch it in order for it to make it you couldn't use it anymore. But with a pot that has a worth, it just has to go in its environment, it has to go near it, and then it becomes that usable. And this is a concept that they extrapolate into life, that a person, right, who has dignity, who wants to be something, who works on themselves, right, if they put themselves in an environment where things are not good, right, that environment will have an effect on them. Right? If you got a person who's an alcoholic, and he goes and he becomes not an alcoholic, or a recovering alcoholic, and he's no longer drinking, right, you wouldn't hire that person as a bartender, right, because you're putting them in a situation where they're going to drink, where they could drink, right? So that would not be a smart thing. You put him in the environment of drinking, and it'll affect him. Right? You put a regular person in an environment of drinking, it probably won't affect them. Right? It could, but it probably won't. Lots of bartenders don't drink or aren't alcoholics, but an alcoholic should not be a bartender. Right? It's not a job you'd want to give a bartender. An alcoholic. Why? Because of the effect of the environment. So if you have a person of dignity who wants to become something and wants to grow, you have to also realize that the environment you're in has an effect on you. It's not just, you can't just say, I'm going to live the way that I think is the right way, and everyone else doesn't matter. It does matter. After a while, you will be affected by it. Like I know that when I grew up and lived in a small town where there were so few Orthodox Jews, that you're constantly being attacked, not necessarily in a bad way, but you're being challenged about the most basic things in Judaism, keeping kosher, believing God, on a very low level. Right? And they're constantly challenging you on this, right? Because nobody else believes like you do. After a while, what happens is that things that you would be strict on if you were living in a religious environment, after a while you start being lenient on those things because you're living in a non-religious environment. Even though you still might keep all of the important laws, we start slipping. So we start becoming like our environment. So we start maybe dressing differently, maybe acting differently, maybe, if we would be in a religious area on Shabbos, we would wear a suit and dress up nice. If we're, in an environment, in a place where nobody does that, then we would start not dressing up anymore, right? And there's an effect on us, right? Why is it that parents don't want their kids to associate with bad kids, whatever that means, bad kids? Because the environment that your child is in affects them. We know that. You don't want to go too far with it, but it affects them. So that's what that tells us, that an important pot, right, in a bad environment becomes unusable. While a pot that's clay, that has no worth, that means nothing, you put that in a bad environment and nothing happens to it, because it already is as low as it can go. But a person has a much higher level. So we have to keep that in mind. And I guess we should stop with that.